Good morning. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Mr. Lukas Duffner will defend his academic thesis entitled Promoting Healthy Brain Aging Through Cognitive Activity and Social Contract, a Translational Journey from Neuroscience to Community. May I invite you, Mr. Duffner, to present a summary of your study and the conclusion of your thesis in the next 15 minutes. I give you the word.
Thank you very much, Rector. Dear members of the assessment committee, dear family, friends, colleagues, today I will finally defend my dissertation, which is titled Promoting Healthy Brain Aging Through Cognitive Activity and Social Contact, a Translational Journey from Neuroscience to Community. In the upcoming 15 minutes, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what I've been doing in the last 4 years. Just like our muscles, our brains thrive on activity. When we challenge our brains through activities like reading, learning a new skill, navigating an unknown environment, or engaging in hobbies that require us to be creative, we engage in small mental workouts that may help keep our brains resilient. At the same time, we're also inherently social creatures, be it through ties with our families, friendship, or engagement in our communities. Contact with other people plays a fundamental role in our lives. My PhD evolved around those two factors, so cognitive activity and social contact. In particular, I wanted to explore whether and how the two of them are or may be related to dementia risk in cognitively healthy people. Dementia is an umbrella term for a collection of more than 50 different brain diseases that have in common that they affect thinking abilities in a way that can have a severe impact on the daily functioning of a person. The most common underlying cause for dementia is Alzheimer's disease, but also other forms such as vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, or mixed subtypes are relatively common. The strongest risk factor for dementia is age. The older people get, the higher will be the proportion of those with dementia. Now, due to demographic changes, more and more people are actually getting older, and as a consequence, the number of people living with dementia is expected to increase accordingly. It is estimated that currently around 57.4 million people worldwide have dementia, and this number is expected to increase to approximately 152 million in 2050. Now, this will have a huge impact on healthcare systems worldwide, but especially in low and middle income countries where this increase is expected to be strongest. Now, we also see that in some Western countries, even though the absolute number of people with dementia is increasing, the speed at which new cases are being added has actually decreased to some extent. In fact, some large studies suggest that on a group level, we might be able to lower our risk or even prevent dementia by tackling various modifiable risk and protective factors. And this, for instance, includes making sure everybody receives proper education, but also the treatment of conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, or hypertension seems to be important. Also, a person's lifestyle is proposed to play a role. This includes things like following a healthy diet, not to smoke, or exercising regularly. So cognitive activity and social contact have emerged as additional lifestyle factors related to dementia risk or proposed to play a major role for dementia prevention. And we defined cognitive activities as those activities that contain a mentally challenging or mentally stimulating component and are being done for the sake of pleasure. So things like reading books, doing puzzles, or learning a new skill. Social contact includes the engagement in activities that serve the purpose of getting into contact with other people. It's like going out, volunteering, or traveling in a group. Now, there are many activities that actually contain both a cognitive and a social component, and that cannot be neatly grouped into one of those two categories. It's like playing board games, or joining a book club, or something that you're doing at the moment, attending a PhD defense. Social contact also includes more than the engagement in activities. Other people are, for instance, also a source of support. in difficult times. So more functional aspects, such as perceived social support and feelings of loneliness, also fall within the concept of social contact. The first goal of my dissertation was to examine what role cognitive activity and social contact may play for the risk of getting dementia. And as it is common for epidemiologists, we did this by analyzing or by studying and following a large group of people over an extended period of time. So in the first study, we analyzed data of more than 7,500 people living in the United Kingdom. And those people participated in the English longitudinal study of aging, ELSA. And they were followed up between 2008 and 2019 to examine whether those people who engaged in a higher number of cognitive and social activities had a lower risk for developing dementia. So those people provided information about their activity engagement in 2008. They were, for instance, asked whether they are a member of any clubs and associations, how often they met their friends, or whether they engaged in any cognitively stimulating activities. We also gathered information about their level of education, about their wealth, so how much money they have available at the end of the month, and their lifestyle. So some of those people then went on to develop dementia. And what we then did was to examine who those people were and whether they differed based on the information that we collected in 2008. We found that people who engaged in a higher number of cognitive and social activities actually had a lower risk for developing dementia. And this is also visible on this graph here. So here you see the proportion of people who develop dementia per 100 participants. At the bottom of the graph, you see people's age. The red line represents people who in 2008 said that they engaged in a high number of cognitive activities. The blue line represents people engaging in a low number of cognitive activities. Now, as people get older, you see that both lines are actually going up, meaning that the proportion of people with dementia is increasing. Excuse me. Increasing in both groups. But you also see that this red line always stays a bit below the blue line, indicating that the lower proportion of people with dementia in this group, of people actually got dementia in this group. In fact, people with high cognitive activity had a 42% lower risk of developing dementia as compared to people with low cognitive activity. And we actually saw the same pattern for social activities as well. And interestingly, we saw that this was actually independent of how old people were, whether they were male or female, also independent of their level of education, their wealth, and their lifestyle. We also saw that cognitive and social activities predicted dementia risk independent of each other, meaning that even though they do have quite some overlap, they both seem to play a role for dementia risk. The second goal of my dissertation was to examine how they may be related to the risk of getting dementia. So in this next study, we decided to focus on aspects of social contact to first assess which other aspects than social activity engagement may predict dementia risk, and then also explored the role of depression as a potential link between social contact and dementia. So in this study, we analyzed data of the same group of people as before, only now they were followed up for an even longer period of time, between 2004 and 2019. We used the method called factor analysis to kind of filter out different aspects of social contact, and then again assess two of those people got dementia. So we found again that people who engaged in a higher number of social activities had a lower risk for developing dementia. But we also saw that those who received larger amounts of social support or a higher degree of social support from the networks, and those reporting lower levels of loneliness also had a lower risk for developing dementia. So this suggests that not only the frequency of contact seems to be important, but potentially also the quality of those contacts. We then also found that those social factors may indeed be linked to dementia risk through their connection with depressive symptoms. In the next study, we decided to take a look at the structure of the brain. And we did this in order to examine whether the brains of people with high cognitive activity and social contact were different from the brains of people with low cognitive activity and social contact. So we analyzed this by combining the results of a large number of studies. And those studies, for instance, examined whether people who more often met their friends had on average larger brains than people who less often met their friends. Other studies looked at the size of specific regions of the brains or assessed the quality of connections within the brain. So by analyzing and combining the results of 43 studies, we found that on average, people who were more cognitively and socially active had indeed on average larger, but also more intact brains. And this was also the case for people with larger social networks, those receiving more social support, as well as those reporting lower levels of loneliness. However, we also saw that these differences in brain structure were actually rather small, while the differences between the studies were rather big. So, for instance, in the way that those studies actually measured cognitive activity and social contact. As the subtitle of my dissertation implies, we also wanted to take a step towards translating our results to public health practice to bring them a bit closer from neuroscience towards community. And we did this by examining whether and how a socially active lifestyle could be promoted in the general public. So for this, we adapted the existing My Brain Coach app. My Brain Coach has been developed by the Alzheimer's Center Limburg to give people insight into several modifiable risk factors for dementia. For instance, a healthy diet, smoking, or cognitive activity. My Brain Coach then sends people daily messages with tips and information on how to work on a chosen lifestyle goal. So based on the findings of my thesis, we developed a new module for My Brain Coach, evolving around social contact. So this module contains information, but also quizzes and challenges about the role of social contact for brain health. So after developing this module, we went on to test it, and we did this in a small pilot study of 21 people with low social contact living in the province of Limburg. So we asked those people to use the module for a duration of 2 weeks, and before and after, we asked them to fill in short questionnaires on their phone. So this, for instance, included questions about how frequently they were in contact with other people, but also about the quality of those contacts and perceived feelings of loneliness. After the study period, we also asked them to fill in a more extensive feedback questionnaire. So we found that after using My Brain Coach for this 2-week period, people reported to be, on average, somewhat more in contact with other people. And zooming in a bit, we saw that this seemed specific to contact with friends rather than contact with family. However, it's also important to notice that we didn't observe any differences regarding feelings of loneliness or the perceived quality of contacts. And when asking people whether the app actually helped them make changes to their social contact, and whether it motivated them to get into contact with other people and to work on their brain health, we got rather neutral responses on average, and there was a large diversity between those responses. But in general, people thought that the content of the module was framed in a way that was accessible to people. So, to sum up, some findings of my dissertation are in line with the idea that being cognitively engaged and in contact with others may play a role for the risk of getting dementia, and that both the quantity and the quality of contacts seems important. We also explored a potential pathway by which social contacts may affect dementia risk. We found that this might be via depressive symptoms as one potential pathway. We also found that cognitive activity and social contact seem to be related to the structure of the brain. And taking a step towards the translation of our results, we found that the My Brain Coach application may be a promising tool for promoting social contact in the general public. With this, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, Mr. Candidate. Mr. Duffner, right in time, 1 minute left over, which we're going to use because we have a lot of questions can be addressed. But before we start, I'm going to introduce your promotion team who help you to reach to this point this morning here. And opposite of me, for the audience here, I would like to introduce Dr. Dekkers, who is here present. He is affiliated with the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology, followed by Professor De Vught, who is Professor in Psychosocial Innovations in Dementia, and then finally the first promoter, Professor Köhler, who is Professor in Neuroepidemiology. And for all of you, we have this morning 5 opponents who are going to address questions to the candidate, and one of the opponents will be online, and she's on the screen, and most of the people in the audience will see her later. Oh, she is already on the big screen. I thought she was only on the side screen, but she's on the big screen too. But that's for later. We're going to start now. And basically, the opposition will be opened in general by the chairman of your assessment committee. And I'm pleased to give the word to Professor Crutzen. Professor Crutzen is Professor in Behavior, Change and Technology at our university, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you very much, dear Pro-Rector. Well, dear candidates, my compliments on all your work. As a chair, I can say that everybody in the committee was positive, so you're standing here rightly so. And I personally appreciated basically this subtitle of your thesis, this translational journey. I think you showed that you have expertise in epidemiology and neurobiology, but you can bring it also to the field. So I think that's not a given thing for everybody, so my compliments on that. I would like to start off by promoting some physical activity. So I would like to ask one of your paronyms to read aloud Proposition 8.
There is a need for validated, comprehensive, and contemporary instruments for assessing cognitive activity and social contacts.
Thank you. You would have probably guessed that my question would be in that direction, right? Because when I received your propositions, I immediately forwarded this proposition to my colleagues, Gisela and Jeroen, who are also in the audience. And actually, I couldn't agree more with this proposition. So in theory, this could be the end of my questions. In practice, however, I think I'll still ask some questions. You know that we're working on a project that's basically related to this. So what I'm doing here is basically learning from you and your expertise. And how I want to do that in your proposition, there's basically 3 adjectives, validated, comprehensive, and contemporary. I would like to go through these 3 aspects, see how much time we've got for all of that. So starting off with the easy one, validated. Let me think, what is my question? How do you want to do that? How do we need to get there?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for your question. So I wanted to include this proposition in the first place because I think we should be very aware about the imperfection of measurement tools that are out there at the moment for actually assessing cognitive activity and social contact. Some of this may also come from a general unclarity, more conceptual unclarity that exists. So in addition to the fact that those tools may seem to measure somewhat different things, somewhat different matrices. So some look, for instance, at the intensity of engagement, the frequency, the diversity. I indeed believe that their main drawbacks could somehow be framed in those 3 points, or their validation, their comprehensiveness, and how contemporary they are. So with regard to this, the validation, coming to your question, most of those tools are actually developed in high-income countries. So whether they are actually valid in other, non-Western populations is not really clear yet. Nevertheless, they sometimes are being used actually across populations. So there is clearly a need to also validate them for different populations. And how we would want to do that, to come to your question, I think it is very important to actually start bottom up, to actually start examining what the needs are of specific populations and what activities they actually engage in. And as I learned, this is also what Giselle is actually doing, to actually start from the bottom and examine what activities people actually engage in and whether they are applicable across different settings, so different age groups, different cultural settings, for instance, also language settings. For
Yeah, but you're immediately jumping towards like translation, right, to other languages, other cultures, and so on. But they have been applied in developed in specific settings and specific contexts. Do you think we've got one that work in the setting in which they were developed?
So you mean that whether the existing tools could be applied to a new setting?
No, actually in this setting in which they were developed, you said like, okay, they are developed in, for example, you mentioned Western countries as a generalization. Are they valid in that context?
I guess there are some existing tools that have some validation. For instance, think of the cognitive activity scale by Wilson et al., which is quite widely used. We saw in chapter 5 that this is actually the most widely used tool. I'm not sure if to what extent they are actually validated in the same population. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're asking, like, we want the need to have more validated questions. So then.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I guess this is more of a general problem, indeed.
Okay, but let me rephrase it then. Let's say, okay, we do it like you say, we go bottom up and we collect all kind of things like the needs for that specific population, whatever the population it is. How do we then go on to validate it? Like, do we compare it to some gold standard, or how would you go about that process?
I see. Yeah, this is also a bit depending on to what end you are validating those questionnaires, I would say. If it's like for validating towards dementia risk and actually defining a certain cutoff, well, yeah, this is something that has not really been done. So what we can say and what is frequently being said is that more activity engagement is better. But, well, how much is the activity, is the gold standard? This is not really known and not really clear yet. And I think that this diversity in matrices is actually complicating that to some extent. If, for instance, you engage in a high-intensity activity for, let's say, 3 days a week, or a low-intensity activity for 7 days a week, we don't know whether this will have the same effect on dementia risk. So I'm not sure if we will ever be so far, actually.
Okay, but so it's a mission impossible?
Well, I'm not sure if it is impossible. It is impossible with the tools that are, and this conceptual clarity that is out there at the moment. But if we actually would know what we are measuring and that we are more or less measuring the same thing, then this would be more feasible, I think.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of related, well, that's my assumption, to this comprehensive aspect. Because I think when I listen to you, I hear you already say you need to collect activities. Yep. In your answer, you also mentioned something about intensity of activities, like that this matters. Are there other aspects that we need to take into account?
So we have the diversity of activities. That's one that also is coming back. This is also, by the way, what we mainly looked at in chapter 2. The frequency of engagement. You have the intensity of engagement. I guess those were the main ones.
So that would be the key things that you would focus on first.
But in terms of comprehensiveness, I think also the types of activities that are included should be a point that should be addressed, because we see that some tools are actually quite restricted with the number of activities that are actually reflected in the tool. So if we want those instruments to be truly reflective of a person's lifestyle, of a person's social and cognitive lifestyle, then we have to make sure that actually a large number of activities actually comes back there.
Okay, thank you. We're also restricted in time, unfortunately, so I'll talk about contemporary another time. Thank you for now. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Van Rooij, and she is professor in psychosocial aspects of care for frail elderly people at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, of the Radboud UMC Nijmegen, I should say. And I would like to thank her that she took the time to join us today, and I would like to give her the word.
Thank you. Congratulations with your very important work, and I also want to congratulate your supervision team. And you really contributed to the potential of cognitive activities and social contact to protect brain health. And I think it's a very important question nowadays, especially there is a lack of other therapies, and so we have to look for everything, and I think this is an important opportunity for us. And I especially want to compliment you for the empirical part of the thesis, but I have my concerns and questions about the conceptualization and the theoretical contributions, and I want to ask you questions about that. First of all, you refer to the concept of social health as an umbrella concept to end the confusion on what is social health and to end the diversity of terms used to refer to social aspects. But you don't use the concept social health. You use the concept social contact, and I'm curious why you are doing that.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for the question. It's true, we do refer to the concept, to the umbrella concept of social health, but we don't actually place I'm not placing my thesis within this concept from the very start. And one reason for this actually was the quite explorative nature of some of the analyses that we ran, in particular chapter 4, but also chapter 5, for instance. And I guess the second reason is more of a pragmatic one, is that the way this project actually evolved. So at the beginning, we were actually focusing on cognitive and social leisure activities in midlife. So yeah, it was quite restricted to those two aspects, but we soon noticed that in terms of a person's social life is much more than that. It also includes the environment, which is also nicely reflected in the social health framework. So, yeah, I guess those are the two main reasons. But I think even though we didn't place it into the framework early on, we can still explain some of the results by using the framework.
So, you are aware that you just use a part of social health, and indeed you can place it within the framework if you acknowledge it's just part of social health. But in order to frame social health as an important concept for prevention and treatment of dementia, I think it's very useful to use one concept and to put the others underneath it, then we make points. So else it's like you are talking about apples, pears, and bananas instead of nutrition. And nutrition is much stronger, and social health is stronger than social contact. And another thing is that you, in social health, it's the influence of one person on others and others on one person, and that in relation to well-being. And but here, actually, you only look at the level of the social environment. Well, and so you are missing part of it, and you are missing the part referring to the norms, living according to norms and the capacities of the patients themselves and their independence. Do you think these are important missing qualities, or do we have any indication that these are important?
I for sure think that those are important qualities, and I think they are rightfully also included in the social health framework. I do believe that the engagement in leisure activities also kind of falls within well, fulfilling one's capacity and living a healthy, happy life. So I do think that to some extent we did capture it, but I agree totally that there are more aspects of fulfilling one's or living in independence than the engagement in leisure activities. And well, this should also be taken into account. I do believe that so the social health framework, if I understood correctly, is also kind of built to explain the role of social health across the entire disease spectrum, so more in the later stages of dementia as well. And I think that given that we were mainly focusing on the primary prevention of dementia, things like living independently as a risk factor and as something that we can tackle to prevent dementia, maybe playing somewhat less of a role than the engagement in leisure activities, or may play a role maybe at a later stage only.
Well, we should investigate that, whether
Indeed.
it's less important. Well, in fact, you measured a kind of low-hanging fruit. So you used measures that were available. And if we want to move forward, it might be very important to introduce new measures. Well, I have a question on this theoretical framework, but actually I'm more curious about your answer on another question, so I skipped that one, and I want to move on to what is an important question also for myself at this moment. You found several risk factors, and you found protective factors. Do you dare to say that what you call social contact is a modifiable risk factor, and at this stage already, and that we have to put a lot of energy on it? So where are we in the process, and what is needed to dare to say, yes, social contact is very important?
I think this is a very interesting and important point you're raising, and also something that we've been thinking about quite a bit. So I do believe that to some extent it is modifiable on an individual level, but on the other hand, people also exist in their environments, and well, they're not solely responsible for all their behavior. And so I think it's also important that we consider the wider environment, which may not be necessarily modifiable on an individual level. Also take this into account. So, for instance, the conditions.
But do you think it's important as such, social contact?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And that we have a definite answer now that really matters, or do we need more evidence?
No, I honestly think that if we look at the findings of my dissertation, but also how the field as such has developed in the last years, in combination with expert opinion as well, that we can build quite a case for the role of social contact as a modifiable risk factor. And this seems to be somewhat picked up also by the scientific community. It is, for instance, somewhat included in the report of the Lancet Commission, and now also in the updated report. So I do think that the potential is there, and that we can firmly say that it is important to actually focus on social contact as well as cognitive activity.
Okay, so you made a step forward in the knowledge on the influential factors to dementia. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Professor Riedler, and like I mentioned before, we now go online. She will be appear over there. Professor Riedler is affiliated in the chair of public mental health at the University of Leipzig and she joins us today not from Leipzig, but she joins us from Dresden. And I would like to welcome her, and I'd like to give you the word, Professor Riedel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the great talk. And I think it's a really very important topic. And yeah, promoting social context should be in the brain health agenda. And I would like to dip a little bit in chapter 6 of your thesis about the social contact module of the brain coach. And I learned that you did this small study, this pilot study, and you could show that social contact increased. And I would like to hear your idea why you did not make a point on loneliness first, and then we go a little bit further, but maybe you can comment on that, what your ideas are.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for the question. It's about chapter 6, or why I think we didn't find any differences with regard to feelings of loneliness, but concerning contact frequency. So, yeah, this difference in Lübben's social network skills scores was actually quite surprising, we have to start with, because my brain coach has a relatively low intensity. It is meant as a tool for awareness raising, and then to see that there was actually a difference in such scores corresponding to a medium to large effect size was actually quite surprising. We indeed didn't see any differences concerning feelings of loneliness, and while we cannot say this with a lot of certainty, I do have some suspicions of why we didn't see this. So maybe as a proclaimer that this is a pilot study and we should be really careful with interpreting this as such. One thing is that I believe that reasons for loneliness are very diverse and may need more than a one size fits all measure. We also see that in chapter 7, by the way, that there is a large array of interventions for loneliness, and they do seem to work. And another thing is that's still related to the intensity of the intervention. I think it's possible that my brain coach, with the daily nudges and the suggestions that were given by the app, may not have been intensive enough, actually, to change more deeply rooted and more potentially also more systematic feelings of loneliness. So, more structural reasons for loneliness, for instance, will not be addressed by simply, telling a person to get into contact with others and providing them with information. And this is also the reason why I included another proposition, which the number I do not know at the moment. And maybe
and that's fine. So I personally like the brain coach a lot. So we're looking from Germany to you, and we would like to have it in Germany as well. And I'm a little bit interested. You went on the way to translation from your results into this online tools, and how goes it further with the brain coach? It was a pilot study. What are the next steps?
Well, the best thing, the most beautiful thing, in my opinion, would be to actually validate this in a larger study that also contains a control group. However, this would be nice, but I think it is also quite difficult because recruiting those people for this pilot study was already a very big challenge. So you can think that people with low social contact, people who potentially sometimes feel lonely, are not necessarily those people who readily reply to adverts. So one thing would be a larger study with a control group, and then to also look into other modules of my brain coach, for instance, cognitive activity as well.
Do you have ideas how to sample individuals other than through advertisements? So you mentioned this problem, you won't reach those individuals in need.
So I guess the question was how we can sample.
You mentioned it's difficult to get those individuals in need in these trials or in this study. If you make a ad in a newspaper or who wants to come for this prevention trial, what could be ways to find those individuals in need?
Yeah, I understand now. I didn't hear
Better
the question.
ways.
Yeah, our most successful recruitment approach was actually hanging out flyers in the Albert Heijn, which is a local supermarket. So I think this nicely shows that we have to have the threshold for people to actually reach out to us and to participate in the study as low as possible. And this also concerns the more substantial stigma that is actually around for some social factors, for instance, feelings of loneliness. So really keeping up this positive recruitment approach without stigmatizing people is very important. And then also, giving people something in return, of course.
So I have another question going back to chapter 2, more to your epidemiological work. And you relied on the ELSA study and the measures you used, they are in the study. So if you could start an epidemiological study again on your own, what instruments would you put in to measure social contact?
What study instruments you mean?
If you can start a new epidemiological study.
I think it's very important that an instrument for social contact is, comprehensive, as we saw also in Proposition 8. And there is one tool that I think contains different aspects of social contact quite well, and it's the Social Integration Index. So that would be an interesting one to take into account as well, but then also tools focusing on feelings of loneliness and more perceived social support, but also taking aspects such as marital status into account, which we didn't do because we're not entirely sure to what extent this would be considered modifiable at this point.
Social isolation, you mentioned it is in the Lancet Commission paper, just came out, and went from 12 modifiable risk factors to 14 now, and we get to know more and more. My question is, what do you expect? What are the next modifiable risk factors? And
Professor Rieder, I'm sorry that I have to interrupt you, because once you're talking, my microphone is blocked as well. So now you stop talking and I can interrupt you. Unfortunately, your time is over and we have still more 2 opponents. So I think we have to proceed, and I would like to thank you for your questions. Thank you very much. And again, like I mentioned, we have to proceed and we go further with Professor Schramm. She is involved as head of the Department of Diabetes Epidemiology at our university, and I also like to give her the opportunity to discuss with you.
Thank you, Pro-Rector and dear candidates. First of all, I would like to congratulate you and your team with your really nice thesis, a very important topic that needs to raise more attention. My daughter saw the cover of your thesis and they were really intrigued by this picture of the campfire. So they sort of connected also to coziness, gezelligheid, and social context. So I really appreciate that. But next to these friendly words, it's my role to be critical about your work. So I will ask you some critical questions about chapter 7. And you did a systematic review on interventions to tackle loneliness and social isolation among the elderly. And my first question was actually, why do you focus on the elderly would you think that the interventions needed to change loneliness are different between people of younger ages and older ages?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for the question. So for the first part of your question, why we're focusing on the elderly as defined by 65 plus, this was actually a practical reason, because this systematic review was actually conducted within a larger project, the EU Prevent Profile project, focusing on the prevention and tackling of loneliness within the Euro region. So it is an Interact project between Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And the focus of this project was actually on older adults. And this was defined following the common definition of 65 plus that is also used by Eurostat, for instance. So this was more of a practical reason. And then as to your second part of the question, whether there should be different interventions, I think there should be, yeah. Some of the interventions that we did identify were quite tailored to older people's needs, and we know.
Can you elaborate a bit on the tailorment? What was how do they tailor?
So in terms of settings to which they were applied, also in terms of like materials used, for instance, in those interventions. One example would be a horticultural intervention in a nursing home. I'm not sure if this would necessarily apply to younger people with different needs and interests. On the other hand, I do think that we do see this EU function of loneliness, in which high levels would occur mainly in younger age, but also in older age. So I'm sure that there certainly is a need to also effectively address loneliness in this younger group. But there are, as I also mentioned before, there's a variety of risk factors for loneliness, and some of them are very specific to the age group which we're studying. For instance, the loss of a partner, going into retirement. So those are more things that are more applicable to older people, and I do think they require a different approach, a more directed approach towards those life events, so to say.
Okay, thank you very much. That's an elaborate answer. So in your study, you combined information, a wealth of information that you found in literature, many studies, many different ways of intervening. So why did you decide to even try to merge these different approaches, because they're so different?
To merge in a way of a...
In the meta-analysis.
Oh, but we did? No? We conducted a meta-analysis, or is that...
Yes, that's my question. Can you actually do that, because it's so different?
Yeah, this is also a question that we ask ourselves quite frequently, because we do see that there is still a lot of heterogeneity, or quite some heterogeneity that we cannot explain, even by the meta-regression. I do think it is possible, nevertheless, because even though if you look at those interventions, they may seem quite diverse in terms of mechanisms. They may not be as diverse as they seem, I think. And this was more the reason why we thought this is actually adequate to do.
That's a nice bridge to my next question. So on page 233 and 34, you have this large table. And in your conclusion or the discussion of the paper, you sort of mentioned that you have found 3 effective components that are part of the intervention. So one is, it's on page 233, right at the bottom, promoting social contact. And then on the other page, there is increasing knowledge and skills and addressing maladaptive social cognitions. And if I look into your results, none of these was actually statistically significant. So I wonder, can you really make this statement that you found these three effective components?
I guess I would argue that one of them was actually statistically significant in our main model in in model 1. We decided to use model 1 actually as our baseline because some of the information for model 2 and model 3 were not really included.
Which one was significant then?
The non-technology-based interventions had a significantly lower effect size, with a p-value p-value of point.
But is it specific for one of these components?
Yes, so those were the interventions that actually. So we first identified interventions that include this component, and then based our meta-regression on a dichotomous variable representing this component. And we were actually quite surprised by this relatively large.
But is that then a combination of all these three different components? Or
No,
how do I
no.
understand
This is only the. I'm referring to something different here. I think.
I think so.
I think you're right. Yeah. No, those were technology versus non-technology-based interventions. I see.
I don't want to bring you in any trouble during this defense. So, so if I have some time, I can ask you on my last question. Do you have some time?
Yes.
Yes? I would like to go to your proposition, number 11. Maybe one of your paranames could read it out loud.
Though certainly mentally stimulating, doing a PhD can be an utterly unsocial experience. Not in this thesis.
Yeah, so I was intrigued by the last phrase, not in this thesis. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So, well, in these last 4 years have been very mentally stimulating, and you have to learn many new skills and apply new techniques, think about new things. But yeah, I've also been accompanied by a great team, by a great group of people, and yeah, I had a lot of social support, and well, I think without them I wouldn't be standing here today as well. So I thought it would be nice to also include this as a proposition.
Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you very much for your answers. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Handels. He is affiliated with the Department of Psychiatry and Neuropsychology, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, prorector. Dear candidate, also my compliments to you and your promotion team. It's really a solid piece of work, and to me, I think at some point it also becomes an example of how to try and address the issue of causality in observational studies. And I think you really carefully looked into reverse causality and tried to adjust for possible confounding. It was also nice to see some humor in the thesis, calling the figures on page 55 and 94 simplified. And I had a couple of questions that came up to me. And the first question is, so you advocate for social contact, and in proposition 9 you also say something like, you know, you should not just go out and say to people, you know, be more socially to just have more social contact. So I was wondering, should we all go out to a bar and have a beer to feel a bit more relaxed and have more social contact, maybe a glass of wine, maybe some dinner that might not have the best, you know, to be the best for our diet? How would you recommend that to do for us?
Esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and for the question. I would not. I'm sorry. And this is a question that actually comes up quite frequently, especially at Alzheimer cafes, where, well, people were interested on what they can do to lower their risk for dementia, and we always advocate for being social and being mentally engaged. Yeah, other risk factors such as alcohol consumption, smoking, yeah, they are risk factors, and the mechanisms by which they may affect dementia risk, I would argue, are may be a bit different than from what we see with social contact. I also had, as a personal anecdote, one friend had asked me, "Oh, I'm a smoker. I'm very social. I meet many friends when I'm at the bar. So yeah, does it level out?"
Yeah,
I would say so.
And that actually is what I like to go to, because if I look at table in page 32, I see that you found a relative risk of, it depends a little bit on the model that you choose, but it is around 0.60, 0.70. If you are being more socially active in terms of the risk of dementia. And I looked up in the Libra score, what's the relative risk for alcohol, and that's 0.74. So it brings me still back to the question, like, I mean, it's like the same as for medicine. You take a medicine, you have side effects. So if a little alcohol could help you, to pass the threshold and be more socially active, I would actually, consider that to be, it might be worthwhile the risk. So that's actually the first question. How do these relative risks compare to one another, and would, can you see it as kind of a balance to, being a bit worse on one? If that could help out to be more active on another, would that be worthwhile? And the second question is, you say that being socially active is not the magic bullet, but it's the same level as alcohol. I mean, and that we know is really a huge risk for not only dementia, but also other disease. So isn't being socially more active, isn't that actually the magic bullet?
Well, I would say that in general, if you look at different risk factors for dementia, they are correlated, and they are proposed to be more of a marginal nature, in which actually you would have small contributions of different risk factors that, if you would see them as a whole, might actually have a relatively big impact. And then on the other hand, social contact is also proposed to be kind of a catalyzer for other risk factors. Now, to come to your question, for this you would have to look into the interaction of different risk factors, which we didn't do in this chapter, and also not in my dissertation, because one of the questions we had was actually whether social contact adds to the existing risk factors. And also, in terms of those hazard ratios, I think that they are not weighted yet. So this correlation is not really taken into account on a risk factor to risk factor basis. So one way of examining this is actually to look into interactions with specific risk factors, but then to also calculate the weight for social activities, which I think has not been done yet.
That sounds like a good next step for future research. I have a second question, and that relates to something you say, like, in observational studies, you can take a life course perspective, which is really tricky to do in a randomized trial, because you need a randomized trial for over 50 years or something. Yeah. But in a life course perspective, I wonder how you measure being socially active and cognitively active, because what I read in your chapter 2 and 3 is it's been measured in terms of, for example, reading a newspaper, owning a mobile phone, and membership of something like a political party. That to me sounds a little bit outdated nowadays. And I wonder, I mean, from the 90s onwards, we had computers, then we had phones, then now we have social media, and AI is knocking on the door. So particularly with the last two things, we don't need to do any thinking anymore, and social media is making us completely socially active. How should we deal with these two new developments? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it mixing up the work? Can we measure it still? I mean, it's...
Yeah, I guess this is also why the last part of Proposition 8 was included. They have to be contemporary. So if you, for instance, I'm using again the example of Wilson et al., one of the items that is in there is whether there is a globe present in the household. Mm. And this might have been very applicable back then, but yeah, it is not very applicable now. And things like social media, like AI as well, well, they are not included in tools, the majority of which has been developed in the early 2000s. And well, there's certainly a need for those tools to also have this versatility. Yeah, I guess this really taps into the need for more of a bottom-up approach to actually creating those tools as well.
And what's your opinion on social media? Do you think that these are actually stimulating our social contact, or is it more like, you know, scrolling through videos and diminishing our brain activity? What's any view on that, perhaps?
Yeah, people. So there have been studies about that, and people do actually prefer real-life contact over social media contact. But they also mentioned that if they are used to actually facilitate real-world contact, it can be very useful tools to be used in this regard. For instance, also things like WhatsApp. Not necessarily only social media scrolling through videos in an endless loop, but also actually physically putting people into contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about the measurements? Should they? I mean, can you make them flexible enough to allow to allow these changes to happen over time, but still measure the same concept?
Yeah, I guess that is a tricky one, because that would require, of course, to measure the same items actually over and over again, and we will be relying on self-report for this. Yeah, I guess this is indeed a very tricky one, and I'm not entirely sure how to tackle this yet.
Dear Mr. Candidate, dear Mr. Duffner, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw and going to discuss the quality of your thesis, but also the way you have defended this thesis this morning. I request that you and your company, here available, await the result of our deliberations and our return to the aula. Thank you very much.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. The mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Yeah.
You answered really like
Yeah.
well and slowly.
I felt way more confident on the trial defense.
Please be seated.
Dear Mr. Duffner, I hope I pronounced it correctly. A little bit, not correctly. Should I have Duffner? Duffner, okay. The degree committee here present has assessed not so much the quality of your thesis, because it has already been approved, but particularly the way you have defended your thesis this morning. In view of its unanimous positive verdict, and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you officially the degree of doctor. And looking to your body language, you are pleased. Very good. Professor Keuler is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with our Dutch university custom. And I invite your supervisor now to take the floor. And I give him his word.
Please all rise.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I do.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Lukas Andreas Duffner, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Please be seated.
I give the word to the first promoted Professor Keuler to speak out the Laudatio.
Yes, esteemed Dr. Duffner, dear Lukas, this is it, the end of your journey from neuroscience to community, your journey as a PhD student. And what a great journey it was. You really walked the talk during these years as being socially and cognitively highly active. And we see it leads to a healthy brain and all that comes with it. As they say in German football, after winning the cup or the championship, da ist das Ding. So Lukas, there it is, your doctoral certificate. And how much you deserve it goes without saying. But still I have a few words to say. We first got in contact on December the 20th, 2019, when you sent an email expressing your interest in the PhD project, The Curious Brain. Backed up by a cum laude Master of Science in Clinical Neuropsychology, experience as research assistant at the University of Groningen and as a teacher at Leiden University, you seemed a good candidate. Your references that we called were extremely positive about you. And after a convincing and energetic interview, you got the position out of 21 candidates. On May the 1st, 2020, you started on The Curious Brain, a project funded by a generous contribution of the Adriana von Rinsen-Ponsen Stichting and the Alzheimer's Centrum Limburg. The project focused on two parts, as we heard today. On the one hand, we wanted to get a better understanding of the independence or potential overlap between cognitive and social activities. For this, you studied associations using data from large epidemiological studies, and you led a systematic review and meta-analysis on the relation of these factors with MRI brain measures. For the latter, you scrutinized almost 7,000 articles to identify studies that should be included, together with your colleague Nathan. You also dived deep into the literature on the social health concept, dissected it into its constituting parts, fueled by your inborn curiosity and eagerness to fully apprehend the topic. These exercises made you become a true expert in social health, and it was you teaching us about its different facets and what we should study. The other part of the project focused on the translation of these findings into the My Brain Coach app. For this, you developed a new module on social activities and tested its effect in real life. You included the participants, interviewed and tested them, including use of the experience sampling method to study the impact of promoting a socially active lifestyle. And while this would have been sufficient work by itself, you also embarked on the Profile project, an indirect study where you led a systematic review into interventions for loneliness in older adults, and participated in other aspects of the study. In addition, you collected data for the 25-year follow-up of the Maastricht Aging Study, interviewing and testing participants. These participants obviously liked you a lot. One woman, I don't know, Astrid, whether he told you, 80 years old, wrote on one of the test sheets, "When are you going out for dinner with me?" You always had lots of ideas for additional studies. With that, you would have easily filled another book, and sometimes you appeared disappointed when we asked you to focus more on your PhD project instead. Indeed, when preparing for this speech, I looked up my emails again from the very beginning, and there I found an email where you came with the idea to study the impact of COVID measures on social and cognitive activities. Do you know when you sent this email to me? No. It was on May the 1st, 2020, your very first day of work. Your start was in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown. Of course, this was a challenge. Supervision and projects meeting were mostly online initially. Our regular meetings were mostly with the four of us, Kai, me, you, and Pablo. No Pablo, Pablo no, and sorry I have to let the dog out, were phrases we often heard. Other famous phrases were, if there's time at the end, I want to discuss another idea. I already talked about that. Or, I don't know, but give me a second, I run the analysis right away. Or, my favorite during your stay in Edinburgh, sorry guys, but I have to put on the washing machine before someone else is using it. The pandemic also came with limited interaction with colleagues during the first month. But other students started about the same time, especially Nathan and Stephanie. The three of you quickly became mates, and over the years even close friends. The gang was later extended by colleagues such as Colin, Leon, and Lotte, and with you as our PhD students, the research line Risk and Prevention started to flourish. For the group, you were instrumental in creating a culture of mutual respect and support. A group where people easily shared successes and failures, but also hotel rooms, jacuzzis, and holidays. You went to Christmas markets together and rock concerts. And Kai and I regularly received pictures from you guys at bars and restaurants in our WhatsApp group. Really, a lot of pictures from bars and restaurants, actually referring on to your question. Part of your PhD was a 2-month visit to Edinburgh, where you worked with Professor Simon Cox and Ellen Gow on the Lothian birth cohort. You immediately convinced them of your qualities. It was already during the second video conference, we were still discussing possible research questions, when Simon and Ellen called you highly skilled. And at the end of the session, Ellen could not wait for you to come over and start the work, declaring, "This was the best meeting I had in months." During your stay, you enriched your methodological repertoire by learning latent growth curve modeling in R, and it led to a very fruitful collaboration, resulting in one of the few studies into change of risk factor exposure over the life course. And hey, you drank coffee with the son of John Raven, the inventor of the Raven's progressive matrices. Who would have thought? You were also a great ambassador of the Alzheimer's Centrum Limburg. Whenever there was something to do or organize an event, you were the first to put up his hand. Your dedication and loyalty was just terrific, even to the extent that you rearranged a long-planned bicycle tour with your father to attend an event at Casteeltoy in Arsen, which also kudos to you, Mr. Duffner. However, there were also some tough moments along the way. Papers got rejected from journals, ideas got rejected by supervisors, and you could not do the Master of Epidemiology training to become a certified epidemiologist B, something you would have loved to do. It almost felt personal to you when your Interact application was rejected by Alzheimer Nederland. Also, a very critical study participant questioned whether you are a good researcher, since you misspelled a Dutch word in your email. However, by far the hardest experience was publishing your very first paper on cognitive and social activities in ALSA. The review process took ages, and lots of emails were sent to the journal. When it was finally published online, you were destroyed. What had happened? Lukas, tell us.
There was a typesetting error in the title of this paper.
Yay, they got the title wrong. Instead of saying modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors in the subtitle, it's read modifiable and unmodifiable. Worst case for you. It literally gave you bad sleep and nightmares. For us, it was not just such a big thing, even a little bit funny, and apologies if we made it even worse. You know, we have a good tradition in our research group to give someone a present for the first published paper in form of a coffee mug with a title and abstract printed on it. And even though the title had been corrected by the journal at that time, we just couldn't resist but to put on the wrong title. I don't know whether you ever used it, even though.
I mean, I killed a fly with it once.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the article has been cited 34 times during the past 2 years, which is a very high number, but half of them cited the wrong title, Lukas. The place where you were fully in your element was at national and international conferences. I think my most frequently asked questions during such conferences was, where is Lukas? And the most frequent answer I got was, I don't know, but he was looking for... Such conferences seemed like a hunt. You being the hunter, armed with someone's LinkedIn profile and a head full of questions, and conference participants as your prey. At last year's AIC in Amsterdam, you even had an Excel list of people you wanted to talk to. And while chatting, you could say to me, sorry, but I just saw someone I was looking for. I'm back in a minute. Hardly ever did you come back. During the conference in Helsinki, it were the people from Alzheimer Europe you had on your radar. Just before you had applied for the position as project officer and were invited for an interview. Since spring this year, you are working there, supporting research projects with your academic and communication skills. It is also a bit closer to your beloved family in Freiburg. Lukas, there's so much more I could say, also lots of stories. I don't say now, but I stop. Marjolein, Kai, and I are so extremely proud of you. Not only of what you have achieved, but also how you achieved it. I am deeply impressed by the ease with which you grasp difficult concepts, your analytical skills, and also your personality. It was my great pleasure working with you, and a true privilege to support you during your PhD journey. Happily, our paths do not part, as we will continue to work together as a research affiliate, which includes your work on the WHO SAGE data, and also putting some of your ideas into papers. My brain is very curious what the future holds for you. I'm sure that with your passion and dedication, team player attitude, and decent character, you will be successful in whatever you do. Marjolein, Kai, and I wish you and Astrid all the best for the future. Warmest congratulations and enjoy your big day. And referring to Dr. Handel's question, I'm now looking forward to engage in some social drinking.
Dear Dr. Duffner, may I phrase like this? Very good. I also would like to congratulate you on behalf of Maastricht University. You, like I mentioned before, the committee here was quite impressed by the way you defended your thesis, and we came to this unanimous decision, and I have to say, like we say in Maastricht, chapeau, that works well. In my congratulations, I also include your promotion team who guided you over these 4 years, and they brought you within the restricted time of 4 years to your thesis defense. I also would like to thank the members of the Corona. I always tell them that it takes 9 minutes to ask questions, but it takes more time to phrase these questions and to read your thesis. And I would like to thank them that they were here, and Professor Vernooij, who came from Nijmegen, and Professor Rieder, who's still there at the screen, who still is in Dresden and joins us. My congratulations also goes to your family. I switch swiftly to German. Also Dankeschön, dass Sie ganz aus dem Schwarzwald hierher gekommen sind. Also es hat uns gefreut, und wir hoffen, dass ihr noch einen schönen Tag heute habt. I also switch to the people in the audience, and I say thank you that you joined, and I'm officially start to close the session. But I would like to mention something too. Your thesis here put me a lot of questions in my screen too, and I thought a lot about. I thought about two things. I have many questions, but basically two. The first question I would you don't have to answer anything. I just give some conceptual ideas. I thought was. Nobody asked the question, what is, in fact, how do you define loneliness? What is loneliness? You never answered, no, you're not, no, I can switch out the microphone. and then my second question is basically for my basic profession. I'm a neuroscientist, but I'm a basic neuroscientist. And I was wondering here, and I'm going to check that later, is a rat also lonely? If you put him for 4 years or 2 years in the cave, is that also loneliness, and how should we look to that? But that's for later. For now, we're going to close, and for closing, I have my official hammer here, and I'll officially close the session, and it was a pleasure. How do we proceed? We proceed in two ways. First, woman? Girlfriend?
Girlfriend, yeah.
Still? Okay. Okay, she can join us for the picture as well. The rest doesn't have to wait. We have a reception, and the reception is basically a full social integration.